My name's Mason Archer, and I'm 21 years old. I live in a small, rundown trailer just outside an industrial town, doing mechanic work to get by. You'd think someone my age would have big dreams and ambitions, but I didn't. Not anymore. Everything changed the night Sienna Moore, my girlfriend, told me she was pregnant. I wasn't ready for it, not at all. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to leave her to face it alone. So I made a decision that altered the course of my life forever. I gave up my shot at a prestigious auto racing apprenticeship. It had been my dream for years. I loved cars in a way most people couldn't understand. To have been accepted into the apprenticeship felt like the ticket to something bigger, a life away from this town and all its limitations. But Sienna needed me, and that's all I could see in front of me. We didn't have a big wedding, no fancy ceremony or extravagant dress, just a simple civil one. There were no frills, no family to celebrate with, just Sienna, me, and a clerk. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We were starting a family, and I was going to do whatever it took to make it work. The trailer was cramped, barely enough room for the two of us, but we made it work. Every day, I fixed farm equipment, delivered vans, and tried to scrape together a living. The work was hard, and the hours were long, but it felt like I was earning every bit of it for Noah, our son, who was born just a few months later. Noah became my world. Sienna and I were struggling, but I found meaning in fatherhood that I never thought possible. After work, I'd spend time building wooden toys, telling Noah stories about race cars, even though I could never make it to the races myself. That was my life now: work, fatherhood, and hope that things would get easier. But, slowly, things changed between Sienna and me. The long hours I worked, the fatigue in my bones, seemed to push us further apart. I noticed Sienna becoming more distant, spending long hours out of the house, sometimes not coming home until late at night. I tried not to let it bother me. She had a lot on her plate, too, but deep down, I could feel the gap widening. I wanted to believe it was just the pressure of being young parents. But the doubt crept in, and as the days turned into months, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sienna stopped talking to me like she used to. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off, saying she was fine, but the silence between us felt louder than ever. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end for us. My dreams of racing cars had already been buried beneath a mountain of responsibility, but now it seemed like even the dream of a family wasn't enough to hold us together. I came home early that evening, the sun still hanging low in the sky. I had been at a farm all afternoon, fixing up a tractor, my arms sore from twisting wrenches, but I didn't mind. I had been working hard for us, for the life Sienna and I had built together. Or so I thought. When I walked through the front door of the trailer, I expected the usual. Noah would be in his room, drawing or playing with his toys, while Sienna cooked dinner or sorted through bills. But instead, there was something strange about the silence in the house. No Noah's laughter, no sound of Sienna moving about. I called out her name. Nothing. I was about to check the bedroom when I heard a noise from the living room. The TV was on, but it wasn't the usual show we'd been watching together. It was some rom-com I didn't recognize. And there, on the couch, was Sienna, curled up with someone I didn't recognize at first. A man. My heart skipped a beat. My hands gripped the doorframe. It wasn't just that they were sitting together. No, it was the way they were sitting. She was tucked against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they both watched the screen, laughing. It was intimate. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the man reached over to grab the remote and pressed a button, flipping through channels. He looked up for a moment, and his eyes met mine. The calmness in his gaze hit me like ice water. Sienna didn't look up right away, but when she did, it was like she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Her smile faltered for just a second, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. And I knew then, I just knew. She hadn't been out late for work or with friends. This was no misunderstanding. It was exactly what I feared all along. She was emotionally detached from me. And worse, she was here with someone else. I didn't know what to say at first. I just stood there, my mind trying to make sense of everything, my heart sinking deeper by the second. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Finally, Sienna stood up, looking at me like she wanted to explain, but didn't know how. She wiped a hand across her face, her expression unreadable. Mason, Who is this? I interrupted. My voice sounded harsher than I intended, but I couldn't help it. My throat was tight, my pulse quickening. She glanced over at the man, a man I had never met before, and gave him a soft, almost apologetic smile. "This is Luke," she said, her words like daggers, dull and blunt. I I wasn't sure how to tell you." "You weren't sure how to tell me?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought this would just stay hidden?" I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the small room. "I've been working myself into the ground, trying to support us, Sienna. And this is how you repay me?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Wasn't supposed to?" I barked. "I thought we had something, Sienna. I thought this." I gestured wildly at the space between us, at the marriage I thought was solid, was supposed to mean something. "What the hell is this?" Luke stood up, stepping toward me. "Look, man, I didn't." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Stay out of this," I said, my voice trembling. It wasn't the man's fault, but in that moment, I couldn't help but feel like he was the embodiment of everything I had lost. I turned back to Sienna. "I don't know who you are anymore," I said, my voice quieter now, breaking. "I gave up everything for you. Everything." The room was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Sienna's face softened. "Mason, I didn't mean for this to happen. I don't know what to say." The truth was, I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I was done. I couldn't keep trying when I was the only one invested. "I'm filing for divorce," I said flatly, the words slipping from my mouth like they weren't even mine. I watched her face fall, but I didn't feel the anger I thought I would. I felt empty. "I'm not going to fight you, Mason," she whispered, almost as if she had expected this all along. I nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't look at her anymore. I just couldn't. A few weeks later, the papers were signed. Sienna and I were granted joint custody of Noah, and I found myself in a quiet apartment with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of Noah playing in his room. It was just me and him now. I focused on Noah, as he was all that mattered. He wasn't old enough to fully understand what had happened, but I saw the questions in his eyes. I saw the moments when he looked up at me like he was waiting for answers that I couldn't give. But I was determined to be the best father I could be. And in those quiet moments with Noah, building go-karts in the backyard, having paper airplane races, and lighting bonfires under the stars, I felt a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. Noah would fall asleep against my chest, his tiny body curled up in my arms, and I'd whisper promises to him. "I'll never be like your mother," I'd think to myself, as I rubbed his back gently. "I'll always be here. I won't ever leave you." I couldn't change what had happened, but I could be the kind of father Noah needed. That was all that mattered now. Despite the betrayal, despite the collapse of my marriage, I was going to be the man Noah deserved. And that was my new purpose. It wasn't hard to tell things were changing. Noah was growing up, and with it, his interests were shifting, moving away from the simple joys we shared. The backyard go-kart rides, the flashlight scavenger hunts at dusk, the late-night bonfires, all of it started to fade. At first, I tried not to let it get to me, but the signs were obvious. It began when Sienna started dating Victor, a wealthy real estate investor. The man had money, and Noah took to him like a fish to water. They went on ski vacations, took helicopter tours over city skylines, and had experiences that seemed straight out of some dream Noah hadn't known he was having. I couldn't offer those things. I couldn't compete with the kind of wealth Victor brought to the table. At first, it didn't seem to bother me too much. It was just a few weekends away, right? Noah still spent time with me when he was home. But then, I started noticing how much time he spent on his phone. No longer did he rush to the door when I came home. No longer did we have our long talks about race cars or the go-kart we were fixing together in the garage. He'd sit on the couch, head buried in his phone, texting Victor or his new friends. It stung, but I told myself he was just growing up. Then came the weekends when Noah stopped showing up. At first, I thought it was just a phase. Maybe he had a school project or plans with Victor and Sienna. But as the weekends passed, his absence became more frequent. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My son was choosing to spend time with someone else. And the more he was around Victor, the less he was around me. One night, after an entire weekend had gone by with no word from him, I decided to ask him what was going on. I knew something had changed, but I needed to hear it from him. He was sitting on the couch, his thumbs flying over his phone, eyes fixed on the screen. I sat down beside him, trying not to show how much it hurt to see him like this. "Hey, Noah," I said gently, "what's going on? You haven't spent any time with me lately. Is everything okay?" He didn't look up from his phone, but I could tell he was listening. After a few seconds, he finally put the phone down and looked at me, the indifference in his eyes cutting deeper than I expected. "I'm fine," he said. "I've just been hanging out with Victor and his friends more." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You know you can still hang out with me, right? I miss spending time with you. We used to have a lot of fun together." He shrugged, his eyes flicking back to his phone. "Victor's just more fun, Dad. He takes us places. We do stuff, you know." I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. "You don't think we do stuff? What about the go-karts, the airplane races? You used to love those." "I know, but it's just different now," he said, his voice almost dismissive. "Victor has a lot of cool stuff. He's more exciting." I nodded slowly, though the words hit me like a punch. "Okay, Noah, I get it. But I want you to know that I'm still here. I always will be. I'm your dad, and I love you." He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me as I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my heart sinking in my chest. I spent the rest of the night in silence, sitting on the couch with Noah just a few feet away, but a million miles apart. I didn't cry right away, but when I finally sat alone in my truck later that night, the tears came, soft and slow, until I couldn't breathe through the pain. For the first time in years, I let myself break down. I cried for the relationship I had lost. I cried for the boy who once cheered for the things I built, the boy who now barely cared to spend time with me. In the quiet of that moment, I realized how much I had been replaced. Not by another person in the traditional sense, but by wealth, by experiences that I couldn't offer. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd ever get him back. The silence between Noah and me grew unbearable. Weeks passed without a word from him. I called, I texted, I left messages, nothing. Holidays came and went, and the phone never rang with his voice on the other end. The Christmas lights hung on the front porch, but they felt hollow. I sat alone on the couch, the empty space beside me the most painful reminder of what was slipping away. Sienna's voice still echoed in my mind, her coldness when she walked out of the marriage. But it was Noah's silence that tore at me now. I could feel my son slipping further from me, from everything we once shared, like sand through my fingers. The connection we'd had, the go-karts, the stories, had all disappeared. It was one of those cold winter nights when I finally broke. I couldn't sit by anymore, couldn't let the void continue to grow. I called a family lawyer, desperate for any way to bridge the chasm that had formed between Noah and me. "I can file for parental alienation," the lawyer said, after listening to my story. "But it won't be easy. The courts tend to favor the child's wishes." I didn't care. I was ready to fight, ready to claw back some semblance of my place in Noah's life. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. Days later, I found myself sitting in a sterile courtroom, the walls blank and cold, with my heart pounding. I had hired a lawyer, but as I looked across at Noah, sitting with Sienna, it felt like I was the one on trial. My son, now 11, was different. He looked more like a young man than the little boy who used to run to me with open arms. His eyes were distant, like he couldn't even see me anymore. The judge asked Noah what he wanted. His voice was calm, emotionless. "I want to spend more time with my mom." The words sliced through me, sharper than I expected. "No, I miss Dad," or "I want to see both of them." Just that flat, indifferent statement. My lawyer tried to argue my case, pointing out the time I spent with him, how I kept the bond alive despite everything. But it didn't matter. The judge ruled in Noah's favor. His right to choose, his right to decide, overruled my plea to maintain the relationship we'd once had. My stomach twisted as the judge said, "Mason Archer will now have an increased child support obligation." And with that, my heart dropped. Not only had I lost the time with Noah that I'd fought so hard to keep, but now I was also financially bound to a child who no longer wanted to be with me. I could barely hold it together when I left the courtroom. I felt hollowed out, a shell of the man I used to be. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the system would help me reclaim some part of Noah. But instead, it stripped me of even more. The final blow came a few days later when Sienna's lawyer reached out. My stomach churned as I read the email. "There's a proposal," it began. "We will end the child support if you are willing to sign away your parental rights." The words blurred on the screen. I read it again and again, as if my brain couldn't quite process what it was saying. Sign away my rights? Was I really being asked to sign my son out of my life? It felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, the foundation of everything I had fought for cracking apart. They had reduced me to nothing more than a paycheck. My son was gone, and now they wanted me to give up my place in his life entirely. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. The thought of losing Noah forever, of signing away my chance to ever see him again, to ever be his dad, left me frozen. The weight of it was suffocating. But in that moment, I realized there was nothing left for me to do. I left the house, my head swimming. There was no going back. No fighting this anymore. As I sat in my truck, the engine idling in the empty parking lot, I felt like a stranger to myself. Everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, had slipped through my fingers. My dream of fatherhood, my son gone. The weight of that empty silence in my chest was unbearable. I pulled the papers out from the envelope, staring at them, the ink blurring before my eyes. Signing them felt like signing my own death sentence, but I did it. With a shaky hand, I put my signature on the dotted line. My heart shattered as I did it. I drove aimlessly after that, drinking from the bottle I kept in the glove compartment. By the time I made it home, I was numb, my mind foggy, and my soul empty. I curled up in my truck that night, too broken to even think about going back inside. The world seemed so far away. And for the first time in years, I finally let myself cry. The conference room smelled like bleach and paper, sterile and cold, a place where decisions were made, where people came to have their lives weighed and dissected. It wasn't where I thought I'd be, not after everything I'd done. I sat across from my son, now 12 years old, and felt a lump form in my throat. He was different, his face hard, his eyes blank, like someone I didn't know. The boy who once ran to me when I came home, the boy who used to call me Dad, like it was the only word he knew, was gone. Noah sat there, still as a statue, wearing high-end sneakers and an oversized hoodie. He looked so much older than his years. His clothes were cleaner, more polished. He looked like he belonged to a different world. And I was just some stranger sitting across from him, trying to figure out where I went wrong. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I had waited for this moment, wanted this moment, but now that I was here, I didn't know what to say. The lawyer leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. Mason, we've prepared the documents. But before you make any decision, we need to ask Noah how he feels about this. It's his right to choose. I nodded, though I didn't really know why. I had already lost him. The lawyer turned to Noah. Noah, you understand the decision your father is about to make, right? Noah didn't look at me. He didn't even move. Just a slight nod of his head. Do you want to have more contact with your dad? The lawyer asked, his voice gentle. Noah's gaze flicked toward me briefly before he looked down at his hands. It was like he didn't even see me sitting there. Then, in a voice so flat it could have come from anyone, anywhere, he said, No, I don't want to. I could feel the room close in around me. It was as if the walls were pressing down, suffocating me. I thought I might choke. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs couldn't expand, like I was drowning in the sound of his voice. You don't want to? I repeated, barely managing to hold it together. My voice cracked in the silence. My own son, my flesh and blood. Noah didn't answer me. He just stared at the floor, his fingers tapping the table rhythmically, like this was nothing more than a casual conversation. The lawyer glanced at me, waiting, but I couldn't move, couldn't think. The truth hit me like a punch in the gut. This was the end. It was over. I turned to Noah, my heart breaking into 1,000 jagged pieces. Is this really what you want? My voice was hoarse, desperate, but I didn't know how to make him hear me. I didn't know how to reach him anymore. He didn't look up. His voice was distant, almost mechanical. Yes. And just like that, I felt the last thread between us snap. There was no more denying it. He was gone. Not physically, but emotionally, mentally. He had already left me behind. I felt like I was suffocating. A weight pressed down on my chest as I sat there, listening to the finality of his answer. I had spent years pouring my heart into being his father, and now he was telling me, so coldly, that he didn't want me. I felt nothing but a hollow ache where my heart used to be. The lawyer slid the papers across the table, but it felt like my hand was too heavy to lift. I didn't want to sign. I didn't want this to be real, but I knew I had no choice. With shaking fingers, I picked up the pen, my vision blurred with tears I refused to shed. I signed my name across the bottom, my heart turning to stone. Thank you, Mason, the lawyer said, as if we had just come to an agreement over a business deal. But there was no gratitude in it. Nothing left for me. I was just a man who signed away his own son. The room felt even colder as I stood, barely able to keep my balance. I walked out without looking back, though I wanted to scream, to run after him, to ask him if he was sure. But he wasn't coming back. He had already made up his mind. I spent the rest of the night in my truck, parked on the edge of some forgotten road. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed to be alone, needed to let the darkness swallow me whole. I reached for the bottle I kept hidden in the glove compartment, unscrewing it with shaky hands, and took a long swig. The burn did nothing to numb the pain in my chest. I kept drinking, letting the liquor drown everything. The heartbreak, the loss, the pain of knowing my son didn't need me anymore. By the time the bottle was empty, I was too far gone. I didn't know how long I sat there, just staring at the night sky. But I knew that something inside me had broken. There was no coming back from this. I had lost him, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. I leaned my head back against the seat, tears slipping down my face, even though I had promised myself I wouldn't cry. I promised myself I wouldn't let this destroy me. But it already had. I woke up in a haze, the world spinning around me. It had been a long time since I'd felt this empty, this lost. The crash had been years in the making, and now I was here. Jobless, homeless, and sinking deeper into a bottle of whiskey that had become my constant companion. I had ruined everything. After I lost Noah, everything crumbled. I couldn't focus on work, I couldn't keep my head clear. I spiraled, one drink after another, until I was waking up in random places, always hungover, always regretting the night before. I wasn't even sure how I'd ended up living in my brother's spare room. David had tried to reach out for years, but I pushed him away. I didn't want anyone to see me like this. But after everything fell apart, he was the only one left who didn't look at me like I was the living embodiment of failure. I was ashamed, but I had nowhere else to go. It was only when I woke up after a near overdose one night that I realized I was close to the end. The next morning, with my head pounding and the taste of regret in my mouth, I knew it was time. I had no idea what it would take, but I had to try to rebuild. I had to find some piece of myself that wasn't lost forever. That's when I checked myself into rehab. It wasn't easy. In fact, it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. I was stripped down to nothing, my walls shattered, my pride gone. But it was the start of something. A slow, painful climb back from the bottom. During my time in rehab, I met Layla. She was a pediatric nurse with a quiet strength that drew me in right away. Her son, Julian, was 11, just a little older than Noah, and when I first met him, he was quiet and distant. He didn't trust me at first, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. But there was something in Julian, something raw and open. He'd sit with me in the backyard of Layla's house, watching me tinker with the old car she'd inherited from her father. Slowly, we started to bond over it, both of us getting lost in the work. I would explain how the engine worked, and Julian would ask questions, eager to learn. It felt good to teach again, to have someone care about the things I had once shared with Noah. It didn't happen overnight. But one day, after a long afternoon of working on the car, Julian turned to me, his eyes a little less guarded than usual. "You know," he said, his voice small, "you're the only real dad I've ever had." Those words hit me like a freight train. I didn't know how to respond at first. I wasn't even sure I deserved to be called that. But when Julian looked up at me with those hopeful eyes, something inside me shifted. Maybe this was my second chance. Maybe I didn't have to keep running from the mistakes I had made. Over the next few months, I worked harder than I ever had before, both in recovery and in building a relationship with Layla and Julian. I started to feel like I had a purpose again. I began fixing up old cars with Julian, teaching him everything I knew, and in the process, I started to rebuild the man I'd lost. It was one of those late nights in the garage when Julian, as if it had been weighing on him for a long time, turned to me and asked, "Hey, Mason, do you think, maybe, you could adopt me?" I froze. I hadn't been expecting that. But then again, I hadn't been expecting any of this, to find a new family, a new purpose. I looked at him, his wide eyes full of hope, and something inside me softened. "I'd like that," I said quietly, feeling the weight of the decision in my chest. I really would. It wasn't the same as what I had with Noah, but it was something real. It was a chance to be the kind of father I hadn't been before, one who showed up, one who cared, one who didn't let the past dictate the future. I couldn't change what happened with Noah. I couldn't bring him back into my life. But Julian? He was here, and I was ready to be the dad he deserved. I may have lost one son, but I had the chance to be a father again. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. It had been years. Years since I'd last seen Noah, heard his voice, felt his small hand in mine. The pain of his absence had been a constant ache, one I had learned to live with. I built a life after him. I rebuilt myself, piece by piece, with Layla and Julian, and I found peace in that life. But nothing had prepared me for the knock at the door that day. I was standing in the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee, when the doorbell rang. It was early, and I hadn't expected visitors. When I opened the door, I froze. There, standing on my front porch, was a man holding a bouquet of flowers. A man who looked like a stranger, but whose eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. "Noah," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. He was 26 now, his face older, sharper, but there was still something in his gaze that reminded me of the boy I used to know. The boy who used to cheer for every toy car I made. The boy who would fall asleep in my arms at night. He smiled faintly, a nervousness in his expression I hadn't expected. "Hi, Dad." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at him, the weight of everything that had happened between us pressing down on me. I couldn't process it all. I had thought that door had closed forever. I had moved on, rebuilt my life. And here he was, standing in front of me, like a ghost from my past. "What do you want?" I finally asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My voice wasn't angry, just tired. So tired. Tired of this old wound being reopened. Noah shifted on his feet, looking down at the flowers in his hands before meeting my gaze again. I need to talk. Can we sit down?" I didn't let him inside. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed. "You're not welcome here, Noah," I said quietly. "Not after everything. You made your choice a long time ago. I'm not who you think I am anymore." His face faltered, just for a second, before he steadied himself. "I know," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I made a mistake, Dad. Victor, he left. I don't know where he is. And I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I want to reconnect." The words hit me like a punch. Victor, the man who had replaced me. The man who had filled the space I once occupied in Noah's life. And now, after all these years, he was gone, and Noah wanted to come back to me. But the thing was, I had built a life without him. I had found peace. I had moved on, and while the pain of losing him would never completely fade, I had learned to live with it. And now, Noah was asking for a place in that life. But I couldn't just open that door again. "I'm sorry, Noah," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I'm not your father anymore. You don't get to come back into my life just because things didn't work out with him. You made your choice when you left. You chose him over me." His face tightened, his eyes searching mine for something I couldn't give him. "I didn't mean it, Dad. I didn't understand then. I was a kid. But now I see it. I know what I lost. I want to be a part of your life again." I shook my head, the words coming more easily now, as if the decision had already been made in my heart, even before he'd shown up on my doorstep. "It's too late for that," I said. "I'm not going to let you come in and tear apart the life I've built. I've worked too hard to get here." For a moment, he just stared at me, his face unreadable. But then, as if the weight of my words had finally sunk in, his shoulders slumped, and he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you'd be different. I thought you'd want to try." I looked at him, my heart breaking just a little, but the decision was made. "I'm sorry, Noah. I'm not the person you think I am. And I can't be what you want me to be." He stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to change, for me to change my mind. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had already walked away from him once. And that had to be the end of it. Without another word, he turned and walked down the steps. I watched him go, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. It wasn't the reunion I'd imagined. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for. It was just final. As I closed the door behind me, the quiet returned. The life I had rebuilt, the peace I had fought for, was still intact. And though the ache of loss would never completely disappear, I knew I had made the right choice. Noah had his chance. And now, so did I. It was a Friday evening, and I was sitting on the porch, a beer in my hand, watching the last of the summer light dip below the horizon. The kids were inside, the house filled with laughter and the faint hum of video games. Layla was in the kitchen, making dinner, her soft voice mixing with the occasional clink of pots and pans. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My life. I had rebuilt it from the ground up. I wasn't the man I used to be, the one who sat in a truck, drowning in regret. I was someone new now, someone who had a family again, a real one, and that was enough. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just another work email or a message from a friend. But when it buzzed again, I pulled it out, frowning at the number on the screen. It was Noah. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to pick up. Layla had warned me, had cautioned me about opening old wounds. And I'd made a promise to myself, one that I'd held firm for years, that I wasn't going to let Noah back into my life. Not after everything he had done, not after the hurt he had caused. But the thing about promises is they're easy to break when you want to believe in something. So I answered, "Hello." My voice was calm, almost mechanical, but there was a tremor I couldn't hide. "Mason." Noah's voice was older now, more mature, but still the same. It sent a wave of discomfort through me, a reminder of everything I had tried to move on from. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. "I've been trying to get in touch with you," he said, his words slow, careful. "I know I messed up, but I want to talk. I think we need to talk." I felt the familiar walls start to rise. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to reopen that chapter. "Noah," I said, my voice cold, "you had your chance. You chose Victor. You chose that life. I'm not your father anymore. You don't get to just show up now, years later, and act like nothing happened." There was a long pause on the other end. I could feel the weight of his silence, and it made me want to hang up. I had nothing left to say to him. I had built a life. A real one, with Layla, with Julian. It was all I needed. But then he spoke again, his voice fragile, like a man asking for something he knew he couldn't have. "I don't want to lose you, Mason. I need you." I squeezed my eyes shut, a deep sigh escaping my lips. The words hurt, but not in the way they used to. Not in the way that would have broken me. "You've already lost me, Noah. I can't keep doing this with you." I hung up before he could say anything else. The feeling of finality settled in my chest. But just as quickly, my phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen. It wasn't Noah this time. It was Layla. I picked it up, the weight of the situation starting to settle in my bones. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "What happened?" I stood up from the porch, looking at the stars. "He called me. He wants to talk. But I'm done. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending he's the person I want him to be." Layla was quiet for a moment, giving me the space I needed. Then she said, "You don't have to go through this alone, you know. You've got us now. We're your family, Mason." I closed my eyes, leaning against the railing. "I know," I whispered, "but some ghosts are harder to let go of." She didn't say anything for a while, but I knew she understood. She always did. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside her, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards, I realized that my past had been trying to claw its way back into my life. But I wasn't the same man anymore. I had built something better, a family that mattered. Noah's attempts to get back into my life were just that, attempts. He couldn't change what had happened, and neither could I. The next morning, after breakfast, Layla was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the paper, when I noticed something strange. Another message from Noah, but this one wasn't just for me. It was for Layla too. It was a request for a family meeting. Sienna's name was attached to it, feigning warmth, pretending to care about some healing family reunion. I scrolled through the message, my stomach twisting. The audacity of them, trying to force a reunion now after everything. After years of silence, of neglect, of me letting go of the past, they wanted to drag me back into their world. A world I had left behind. I set my phone down, trying to keep my voice steady as I turned to Layla. They're trying to force their way back into my life. Both of them, Noah and Sienna. She looked up from the paper, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to let them in, Mason. You've built a life here, and you've built it for yourself, not for them." Her words hit me like a wave, steady and unwavering. A few days later, after Noah sent a message directly to Layla, asking for her help in contacting me, I knew what I had to do. I had to put an end to this. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to allow them to rewrite our story. I picked up the phone one last time, this time to block Noah's number. And when Sienna called again, asking for some kind of meeting, I shot it down with finality. The reunion they were hoping for wasn't coming. Not for me. Not ever again. Days later, at Julian's college basketball game, the past came back once more. Noah appeared after the game, standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd. As he approached, Julian stepped forward, his chest puffed out, his eyes narrowing. "You had your chance," Julian said, his voice steady and firm. "It was the final nail in the coffin. There was no going back. I had built something better, and I wasn't going to let anyone tear it apart." I watched Noah turn and walk away, this time for good. And as I turned back to the game, I realized that the family I had now, the one I had fought for, was the only one that mattered. No more intrusions. No more ghosts. Just the life I chose to protect. It had been a year since I closed the door on Noah. A year since I had made the decision to walk away, to protect the life I had built with Layla, Julian, and our daughters. The pain of losing Noah had never fully left me, but it had dulled, like a bruise that had healed but still throbbed from time to time. I'd found my peace again, piece by piece, and I wasn't willing to let anyone take that from me. The house was quiet one spring morning when the letter arrived. I had just finished breakfast, the smell of coffee still heavy in the air, when I found it sitting on the kitchen counter. A plain envelope, the handwriting familiar, yet distant. I recognized it immediately. Noah's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before I even opened it. The weight of it was heavy, heavier than I'd expected. I knew this letter was a long time coming. But even knowing that, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I sat down at the kitchen table and carefully tore the envelope open. The paper inside was thick, the ink slightly smudged, like he'd written it with a weight on his chest. I took a deep breath before I began to read. "Mason, I know it's been a long time since we spoke, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I understand now. I understand everything I lost. I see it now. I see how I chose Victor over you, how I pushed you away and took everything for granted. I don't have any excuses. I just wanted to tell you that I get it now. You were always there for me, and I wasn't. I thought I was grown, thought I knew what I wanted, but all I did was hurt you. I was too blind to see how much you loved me, how much you tried to give me. I was an idiot, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to take me back into your life. I know I can't undo the past. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I see what I lost, and I'm sorry. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, even if it's just a little. I'll never be the son you wanted me to be, but I hope one day you'll be able to look at me and see the man I'm trying to become. Noah." The words blurred as I read them again, and then a third time, letting the weight of them sink in. I sat there, holding the letter in my hands, letting the silence of the house fill the space around me. Noah had written a letter that spoke of regret, of maturity, of an understanding of what he had lost. There was no excuse for what he had done, but there was something in his words that made me feel, for the first time, that maybe he was beginning to understand what it meant to lose someone. But I wasn't sure I could let him back in. I had forgiven him a long time ago, in the quiet of my own heart, but forgiveness didn't mean letting him back into my life. It didn't mean re-entering a world that had left me shattered. I had made peace with the fact that Noah was no longer a part of my world, and no letter could change that. I held the letter for a few more moments, feeling the warmth of the paper in my hands, the weight of what it represented. But then, quietly, I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. I didn't need to keep it. I didn't need to keep the past alive. I dropped the letter into the flames and watched as it slowly curled, the ink fading into ash. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I just felt a quiet finality. When the letter had burned completely, I turned away from the fireplace and looked out the window at the garden, where Julian was kneeling in the grass, fixing a bicycle with a careful focus. He was my son now. He was the one who needed me, and for him, I would always be there. I walked back to the kitchen and poured myself another cup of coffee, the steam rising in the morning light. The life I had built wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was enough. Noah had sent me a letter, but I had my answer. The past was where it belonged, and I wasn't going to let it destroy the future I had fought so hard to build. I looked out the window again, my heart full of quiet gratitude. I had chosen this life, and for the first time in years, I knew I had made the right choice.